I was standing outside the lawyer's office when I heard my brother's voice through the door. He was talking about me, his dear departed brother, with this tone dripping with grief. The thing is, I was very much alive. 2 years earlier, Marcus hugged me tight before I left for Alaska. He patted my back and said, "Take care of yourself out there, little brother." I had no idea those words were the beginning of a plan to erase me completely and take everything our father had built. Before I tell you what happened when I opened that door, let me know where you are watching from today. Drop a comment below with your location. If you have ever been betrayed by someone you trusted, completely hit that like button. And subscribe if you want to hear how a dead man got his revenge. Trust me, the look on my brother's face was worth every second of those 2 years I spent in the cold. Now let me take you back to where it all began. Growing up in Columbus, Ohio, my brother Marcus and I seemed like the perfect pair. He was 4 years older than me, always the one who knew how to talk his way through any situation. Our father Harold built Harrison Construction from nothing. He started with a pickup truck and a toolbox, and by the time I was born, he had a real company with real employees. Our mother Linda was an elementary school teacher. She had this way of making everyone feel seen and loved. When cancer took her from us, I was 15 years old. That loss changed everything in our house. After Mom passed, Dad threw himself into work even harder. Marcus stepped into an office role handling the finances and the paperwork. Me, I wanted to be out there with my hands in the dirt, just like Dad had been when he started. I went to college for civil engineering, came back, and started working on the construction sites. Dad used to watch me work and say things like, "You remind me of myself when I was young. You got dirt under your nails and honesty in your eyes." I remember feeling proud every time he said it. What I did not notice was Marcus standing nearby, listening, his smile never quite reaching his eyes. On the surface, Marcus was the ideal older brother. He would call me on weekends, ask about my projects, give me advice about life. I trusted him without question. Why would I not? He was my brother. We had lost our mother together. We had watched our father grieve together. I thought blood meant something. I thought family was the one thing you could always count on. When I turned 30, an opportunity came that felt like destiny. A major infrastructure company offered me a position on a project in remote Alaska. We are talking about the real wilderness up near the Canadian border. The contract was for 2 years. The pay was 3 times what I was making. More importantly, it was a chance to prove myself on something massive. I would be helping build roads and facilities in places most people will never see. Dad was proud, but worried. His heart had been giving him trouble for a couple of years by then. He did not say it directly, but I could see the fear in his eyes when I told him I was leaving. Marcus, though, he seemed supportive. He hugged me at the airport and said, "Do not worry about anything here. I will handle it all. Just focus on your work and come back successful." He even tore up a little. Looking back now, I realize those tears were not sadness. They were anticipation. The location was isolated in ways most people cannot imagine. We had a satellite phone for emergencies and work calls, but personal use was limited. Internet was basically non-existent. If you wanted to send a letter, it had to go through the company's relay station, and it would take 3 to 4 weeks to reach anyone. I accepted these conditions because I believed my family would be there when I got back. I set up a schedule with Marcus. I would call home once a month using the company phone, and he would be my point of contact for everything. The first 3 months went by quickly. The work was demanding but fulfilling. I called home on schedule, but Marcus was always busy or unavailable. When I did reach him, he assured me everything was fine. Dad was doing okay. The company was running smoothly. I asked if Dad had gotten my letters, and Marcus said he had, that Dad was proud of me. But no letters came back. I told myself the mail system was slow, that Alaska was just too far removed from normal life. By the 4th month, something felt off. I tried calling the house directly, but the number had been disconnected. When I finally reached Marcus on his cell, he apologized and said they had changed providers. He promised to send me the new number. That number never came. I started feeling a knot in my stomach, this persistent sense that something was wrong. But I was in the middle of nowhere, bound by a contract, surrounded by nothing but snow and mountains and work that needed to be done. 6 months in, I asked a colleague who was heading to Fairbanks to send an email to Marcus for me. He did. No response ever came. I lay awake in my bunk at night, staring at the ceiling, telling myself there had to be a reasonable explanation. Maybe Marcus was overwhelmed with work. Maybe Dad's health had taken a turn, and they did not want to worry me. I decided I would sort everything out when my contract ended. I had 18 more months to go. I buried my anxiety in work and waited. 2 years passed slower than I thought possible. When my contract finally ended, I flew from Fairbanks back to Columbus with my heart pounding the entire way. I had saved most of my salary planning to surprise Dad with a trip somewhere warm, maybe finally take him to see Alaska in the summer, like he always talked about. I took a cab from the airport straight to our family home, the house I had grown up in, the house where Mom had taught me to ride a bike in the driveway. A stranger answered the door. A woman with 2 small children peering out from behind her legs. She told me they had bought the house 18 months ago. She had never heard of the Harrison family. I stood there on the porch that used to be mine, feeling like the ground had opened up beneath my feet. I went to the bank next, thinking maybe I could access my savings account and figure out what was happening. The teller took my identification, typed something into her computer, and her face went pale. She excused herself and came back with a manager. The manager led me to a private office, sat me down, and said words that made no sense. "Sir, according to our records, you have been deceased for 20 months. I laughed at first. I actually laughed because it seemed like such an absurd mistake. But they showed me the documentation. A death certificate filed in the state of Ohio. Cause of death: vehicle accident on a mountain road in Alaska. Body unrecoverable due to the terrain. And there at the bottom, the signature of the next of kin, who had reported the death and claimed the remains could not be retrieved. Marcus Harrison, my brother. The next few hours were a blur of police stations and paperwork. I had to prove I was alive. They ran my fingerprints, checked my work records from Alaska, made phone calls to verify my identity. Eventually, a detective sat across from me and confirmed what I already knew. Someone had fraudulently declared me dead, that someone was my own brother. I went to Robert Hoffman's office the next day. He had been our family's lawyer for as long as I could remember. When his secretary showed me in, the old man looked at me like he was seeing a ghost. His coffee cup shattered on the floor when it slipped from his hand. "Dave," he whispered. "Dave, you are alive." Then he sat down heavily and told me about my father. Dad had died 18 months ago. His heart finally gave out. But what Robert told me next broke something inside me. 6 months after I left for Alaska, Marcus had come to the family with devastating news. He showed them a letter supposedly from the company I worked for, stating that I had died in a terrible accident. He said my body was never recovered, lost somewhere in a ravine. Dad collapsed when he heard. His heart, already weak, could not take the shock of losing his youngest son. In the months that followed, Marcus played the grieving brother perfectly. He comforted Dad, handled all the arrangements for a memorial service, even set up a small headstone in the cemetery next to Mom. And while Dad was drowning in grief, Marcus convinced him to change his will. After all, what was the point of leaving anything to a dead man? Dad signed over everything to Marcus. The company, the house, the savings. Every single thing our father had spent his life building 3 months after changing the will, Dad passed away. Robert said he died in his sleep, but everyone knew the truth. Harold Harrison died of a broken heart, believing both his wife and his younger son were gone. The scope of what Marcus stole took days to fully understand. Harrison Construction, which Dad had grown into a thriving business, was worth around $2 million. Marcus had sold it within 6 months of Dad's death. The family home went for $400,000. Dad's savings account held $350,000. And here is something that still makes my blood boil. Dad had kept a life insurance policy on me with himself as the beneficiary meant to help him if something ever happened to his son. When I died, Marcus collected that too, $200,000. In total, my brother had stolen nearly $3 million by erasing me from existence. But the money was not the worst part. I started reaching out to people from my old life, trying to understand how deep the lie went. I found my Aunt Ruth, Dad's younger sister. When she saw me, she screamed and nearly fainted. She had cried at my memorial service. She had laid flowers at my empty grave every month for almost 2 years. She told me about the service Marcus had organized, how he had stood up and given a eulogy that made everyone weep, talking about what a good man I was, how much he would miss his little brother. I called my old friend Tommy, the guy I had known since middle school. He broke down on the phone when he heard my voice. He told me that Marcus had called him personally to deliver the news, sobbing through the whole conversation. Tommy and our other friends had even collected money to help Marcus with the funeral expenses. They had given $500 to the man who was robbing me blind. That night alone in a motel room, I searched for my own death on the internet. I found a Facebook post from Marcus dated 20 months earlier. With a heavy heart, I have to share that my brother Dave passed away in an accident. He was not just my brother. He was my best friend. I do not know how I will go on without him. Hundreds of comments underneath. Condolences. Stories about me. And Marcus replying to each one with gratitude, playing the devastated sibling perfectly. I sat there staring at my phone, reading messages from people mourning me, and I felt something I had never experienced before. It was like being erased. Marcus had not just stolen money. He had stolen my existence, my relationships, my chance to say goodbye to my own father. He had let Dad die thinking his son was gone. For that, there could be no forgiveness. I knew I could not just storm back into Marcus's life and expect justice. He had spent 2 years covering his tracks, building his new life on the foundation of my supposed death. I needed a plan. I hired a lawyer named Catherine Wells, a sharp woman who specialized in inheritance fraud. She had seen cases like mine before, though she admitted the scope of Marcus's deception was exceptional. Together, we built a case. I gathered every piece of documentation from my time in Alaska. Employment contracts, pay stubs, photographs with timestamp statements from coworkers and supervisors. I obtained copies of the fraudulent death certificate, the modified will, the insurance payouts. Catherine told me Marcus was facing serious prison time. Fraud, forgery, theft. We were talking 5 to 10 years minimum. Then Robert Hoffman called with news that felt like fate. Aunt Ruth had been asking questions about the will for months. She had never received anything from Dad's estate despite being his only sibling, and she found that suspicious. She had requested a formal review, and a hearing was scheduled. Marcus was required to attend. It would be the first time he had to answer questions about the inheritance since Dad's death. I knew exactly where I needed to be. The day of the hearing arrived on a gray Thursday afternoon. Robert Hoffman's office was in an old brick building downtown, the kind of place that smelled like old books and wood polish. I waited outside in my truck, watching through the window as people arrived. I saw Aunt Ruth go in first, looking tired and sad. Then Marcus pulled up in a new BMW, the kind of car Dad never would have bought because he thought they were wasteful. Marcus stepped out wearing a tailored gray suit, a gold watch glinting on his wrist. I recognized that watch. It had belonged to our father. I waited until everyone was settled inside. Catherine had coordinated with the local police. 2 officers were parked around the corner, ready to move on my signal. I took a deep breath, stepped out of the truck, and walked toward the building. 2 years of cold. 2 years of silence. 2 years of being dead. It all came down to this moment. I pushed open the door to the conference room and stepped inside. Marcus was sitting at the head of the table, looking comfortable, confident, like a man who had gotten away with everything. Robert Hoffman sat at the other end with a stack of papers. Aunt Ruth was to the side, a tissue clutched in her hand. For a moment, nobody moved. Then Aunt Ruth looked up and saw me. The color drained from her face. She let out a sound that was half scream, half sob, and I thought she might collapse right there. Robert Hoffman shot to his feet, knocking his chair backward, his mouth hanging open. But I was watching Marcus. I needed to see it. I needed to see what 2 years of guilt and greed looked like when it came face to face with the truth. His expression changed in stages, like watching a building collapse in slow motion. First confusion, his brow furrowing as his brain tried to process what his eyes were seeing. Then recognition, his pupils dilating as he realized who was standing in the doorway. Then fear, pure and absolute, spreading across his features like a stain. His face went from healthy pink to the color of old paper in about 3 seconds. His hand trembled, and the glass of water he was holding slipped from his fingers and shattered on the floor. He tried to stand, but his legs would not cooperate. He dropped back into his chair like a puppet with cut strings. I let the silence stretch. I wanted him to feel it, that moment of absolute exposure. "Hello, Marcus," I said, keeping my voice steady. "I heard you have been telling people I am dead. Funny thing is, I feel pretty alive right now." He opened his mouth, but only a strangled sound came out. He cleared his throat and tried again. "Dave, there has been a mistake. Someone told us you were gone. I thought we all thought." I reached into my jacket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. I walked to the table and laid it down in front of him. It was a copy of my death certificate, his signature at the bottom. "You thought what, Marcus? You thought I would never come back. You thought you could sign my life away and nobody would ever find out." He stared at the paper like it was a snake about to bite him. His mouth moved, but no words came out. Aunt Ruth had risen from her chair and crossed the room. She grabbed me and held on like I might disappear again. She was shaking, crying, saying my name over and over. Then she turned to Marcus with an expression I had never seen on her gentle face before. Pure horror mixed with rage. "What have you done?" she demanded. "Marcus, what have you done?" He did not answer. He could not. The door opened behind me, and 2 police officers stepped into the room. I had called them from the parking lot when I saw Marcus arrive. One of them read Marcus his rights, while the other produced handcuffs. Fraud, forgery, theft of inheritance. The charges sounded almost clinical, too clean for the magnitude of what he had done. As they pulled Marcus to his feet and secured his hands behind his back, he finally found his voice. "Dave, please," he begged. "We are brothers. I can explain. I was going to tell you. I was going to make it right." I looked at him, this man I had trusted my entire life. This man who had watched our father die in grief over a son who was never dead. I looked at him and felt something unexpected. Not rage, not satisfaction, just a deep, hollow sadness. "You let Dad die thinking I was gone," I said. "You stole his last months from me. You let him grieve himself to death. There is nothing to explain." They led him past me toward the door. At the threshold, Marcus turned and looked back. His eyes held something complicated, some mixture of hatred and desperation and what might have been regret. I held his gaze until he looked away. Then the door closed and he was gone. The room was silent. Robert Hoffman had sunk back into his chair, looking like he had aged 10 years in 10 minutes. Aunt Ruth still had her arm around me. She squeezed gently and spoke in barely a whisper. "Your father would be so proud of you, Dave." That was when I finally let myself cry. The trial took place 4 months later. Marcus was convicted on multiple counts of fraud, forgery, and theft. The judge sentenced him to 7 years in state prison. I attended every day of the trial, but never spoke publicly. I did not need to. The evidence spoke for itself. The original will was restored to legal standing. I inherited what remained of Dad's estate after Marcus's spending and the legal fees. The construction company was gone, sold off, and absorbed by a larger firm, but I received financial compensation. I made sure Aunt Ruth received a significant portion. She had been the one who kept asking questions, who refused to let the irregularities slide. Without her persistence, I might never have had the chance to confront Marcus at all. I did not keep the family house. It had already been sold, and even if I could have bought it back, I did not want to live surrounded by ghosts. Instead, I used part of the money to start fresh somewhere new. The first few months after the trial were the hardest. I stayed with Aunt Ruth in her small apartment while I figured out my next steps. I barely slept. Every night I would lie awake replaying the things I had missed. I thought about all the letters I had written that Dad never received. I thought about the monthly phone calls that Marcus had intercepted or ignored. I thought about Dad lying in a hospital bed, believing his youngest son was dead, and I wondered if my face was the last thing he pictured before his heart gave out. The guilt was almost worse than the anger. If I had trusted my instincts when the calls stopped connecting, if I had pushed harder to get information, if I had broken my contract and come home early, maybe I could have been there. Maybe I could have saved him. One afternoon, I finally visited the cemetery. Mom's grave was exactly as I remembered it, simple and dignified, the way she would have wanted. Next to it was a newer headstone for Dad, and beside that, a smaller marker with my name on it. David Harrison, beloved son and brother. The dates were wrong, of course. According to that stone, I had died at 30 years old. I stood there for a long time, just looking at my own grave. Then I knelt down in front of Dad's headstone and started talking. I told him about Alaska, about the mountains and the cold and the northern lights. I told him about the buildings we constructed and the roads we carved through the wilderness. I told him I was sorry I was not there at the end. I told him I loved him. Before I left, I placed something at the base of his headstone. A small stone I had carried back from Alaska, smooth and gray, picked up from a riverbed on a rare warm day. Dad had always talked about visiting Alaska someday. I figured this was the closest I could get to taking him there. The turning point came when I reconnected with Tommy. He had never stopped feeling guilty about believing Marcus about not questioning the story. I told him it was not his fault. Marcus had fooled everyone. Tommy introduced me to a volunteer group that built homes for people experiencing homelessness. It was the kind of work Dad would have loved, using skills to help people who had nothing. I started showing up on weekends then more often. For the first time since I came back, I felt like I had a purpose. Eventually, I moved to Denver. New city, new job, new life. I work for a construction firm that specializes in affordable housing. The pay is less than I made in Alaska, but I go home every night knowing I built something that matters. The nightmares have mostly stopped. I have learned that healing is not about forgetting. It is about learning to carry the weight. I have not visited Marcus in prison. Some people have asked me if I ever will, if I might forgive him someday. The honest answer is, I do not know. I do not hate him anymore. Hate takes too much energy, too much of your life. But forgiveness feels like something I cannot reach, yet maybe ever. What he did was not a moment of weakness or a mistake. It was a calculated plan executed over months and years. He watched our father die in grief and did nothing. He erased me so completely that I had to prove I was alive. Some things cannot be forgiven. They can only be survived. What I have learned through all of this is that Dad left me something more valuable than money or property. He left me his example. He showed me what it meant to build something with your hands, to be honest even when it cost you to treat people with respect. Marcus inherited the money, but I inherited the character. And no one can steal that. Sometimes I stand on a job site at the end of the day and watch the sun go down over the mountains. I think about Dad, about Mom, about the family I lost, and the family I am slowly rebuilding. I think about Marcus sitting in a cell somewhere surrounded by concrete walls, living with what he did. And I wonder if he thinks about it too on quiet nights when there is nothing to distract him. I wonder if he replays that moment when I walked through the door and his whole world collapsed. I wonder if he understands now what he really lost when he decided to betray me. But honestly, it does not matter anymore. I spent 2 years being dead to the world. Now I'm finally learning what it means to actually live. If you are still here with me, I want to ask you something. Have you ever been betrayed by someone you trusted completely? How did you find your way back? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one, and your stories help others feel less alone. If this story touched you in any way, please hit that like button and share it with someone who might need to hear it. And if you want more stories about real people facing impossible situations, subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for being part of this community. No matter what you are going through right now, remember that you are stronger than you think. And sometimes the people who try to bury you have no idea they are just planting seeds for your comeback. Take care of yourselves, and I will see you in the next one.